Hi everyone, welcome to Leading Inclusive Meetings, a how-to guide. With whoever's around you, I want you to start off this training by engaging in the icebreaker that's stated on this slide. So our purpose today is that we are seeking to explain how to lead organizational meetings fully with an eye towards inclusion. And our hope and our goal is with the practice and the ideas that we're giving you all today, that when you plan your next meeting, when you conduct your next meeting, you'll have a really good understanding of both how to do it, but how to apply everything we've learned today to that next meeting that you're doing. So this is our agenda for the meeting today, for the training today, and trainings can be considered meetings. And one of the things I really want to illustrate with this is that if you're conducting your own meeting, this is a really good moment to really invite participation from your attendees so that you can actually get more participation and get more ideas out on the table. Because you can ask your attendees, does anybody have anything to add to our agenda today? So before we begin, I want you guys, either with your group or with the people around you participating in this training, or by yourself, please sort of reflect on these thoughts by writing down your answers on a sheet of paper. Answers could range from have an effective purpose to dealing with difficult people. The goal for this activity is that as you're going through the training that we're about to conduct, you can refer back to this activity and identify sort of what did you already know, what's new, what's a new take on what you thought you knew, that type of thing. So next, according to our agenda, we are going to get into the key elements of leading a meeting. And the idea behind this is to give you all a quick briefer as to what we're really going to talk about today, so that if you need the 30-second what should I take home with me version, or if you need something to organize your notes throughout this training with, you can use these as sort of an organizational thought tool. So here are the first 6. Feel free to pause this video and write these down. Here's the last 6. Again, feel free to pause this video and write these down. Remember, this can serve as an organizational tool for your understanding in this training, but it can also serve as a way to just really understand very quickly what should you take home from this training. So next, we are defining what makes a meeting inclusive. And one of the really important reasons why I really wanted to address this is that I wanted to give you all a sort of definitional standard to compare your current meetings to, so that you can say in reflection, my meetings are inclusive because they meet this part of the definition, or my meetings are non-inclusive because they meet this part of the definition. And this is really important because we need a sort of objective definition to help us evaluate how well we're doing. And if we can't evaluate how well we're doing, we can't have some sort of basis of judgment as to where we go from here or what we're doing well. So I think this is really critical. So here's a definition of inclusive meetings, along with a little graphic sort of diagramming some of the components that you might find in inclusive meetings. One thing I really wanted to focus on is this part of the definition where all voices have equal weight. I don't want you all to confuse that with all voices have equal validity. There are certain meeting purposes that you could develop, certain objectives, certain needs that those meetings demand, where all voices shouldn't have equal validity. Sometimes if, let's just say hypothetically, you're in retail and your employees are not doing their jobs because they're bored or whatever, you as your boss, as the boss there, has more validity than your employees. And so you have that right to sort of be strong and be like setting boundaries. And one of the key ways to think about this almost is with kids. If you're trying to work with them one on one or teach them anything, you have to always walk this fine line between boundaries and freedom and happiness. And sometimes you're over on that too far side on the left where you're too easy on them and they're disobedient, sort of, getting in all sorts of trouble or not listening to the adult figures in their life. But sometimes you're too far on the other part of that line where they're sad or they're frustrated or they're just sort of learned helplessness. They learn that they can't do it. And meetings are a lot of the same. Sometimes the purpose and why you're having that demands you to set those boundaries, to set those power dynamics in place to get it to work. But sometimes you have to be on that other side, and it really sort of takes a reflective mind to sort of understand when do they have to be harsh and a leader and a powerful figure, and when can they actually allow that freedom, that safety, that psychological safety. So these are some other components about inclusive meetings. These are different sort of aspects or characteristics, you can say. Two of the ones on this slide that I really want to focus on is free of judgment and outcome focused. So with free of judgment, one of the things to really think about is that this is not just dependent on your meetings. You can set free of judgment up by how you as a leader behave to your meeting attendees before that meeting. So if the culture, if the environment of your workplace is safe, is happy, is filled of moments where people can make mistakes, and as long as they're really trying hard and really working hard at getting better, then that's okay. Then you set the environment for meeting attendees in your meeting to feel safe to speak up already. That's not saying that like all mistakes are equal or anything like that, or you can't like land down on some of these, but there has to be that safety ahead of time sometimes to make people feel comfortable in speaking up. Outcome focus is the other thing I really want to focus on, and that's this idea that it's not just okay for everyone to have ideas and share them and for the meeting to go crazy. You have to pre-think and you have to pre-think about what's the outcome you want to accomplish and what's the most efficient way to do so and how will I know if I've accomplished that. You may even want to communicate that to your meeting attendees so that you can have a group-wide discussion at the end and be like, did we accomplish what we set out today? Did we not? And why? And how can we grow and improve? When you don't reflect on this, meetings tend to sort of be less participatory and less successful. But when you make this sort of an active component of your reflection, of your teamwork, of your group, then meetings tend to actually always get things done, always meet the outcome you decide because everybody is conscious of it. The culture of your organization and of your workplace understands that stuff has to get done. So one of the things I really wanted to use this slide to talk about is that we all have stereotypes or biases that we may not think about, but that we bring into meetings and actually sort of impacts the success we can have. And one of the ones I need to explain because it's not immediately obvious from the slide is out of sight, out of mind. This stereotype is often where you have a meeting where you have 5 people in a room and you have 2 people phoning in. Those 2 people phoning in often get excluded because often what happens is the 5 people in the room are very tight and the 2 people phoning in are sort of not involved, not included by those 5 people who are very tight and are just sort of listening the whole entire time. And you never even know, like they might be listening in their PJs and you never even know. Um, One of the things I really want you guys to do with this list of stereotypes is write them down and keep them in mind as we go through some of the ideas, some of the concepts of really running a successful meeting and running a meeting that is inclusive. Because you may see in some of these ideas that we're having that they help combat some of this. They help make it less likely that these stereotypes or these biases are really at work in the meeting that you're holding down or running. And if they do, then you have tools there that are directly impacting your success at having an inclusive meeting. So now that we talked about what defines an inclusive meeting, here's a list of just 5 keys that you need to consider before you actually start your meeting. And we're going to talk a little bit about the varying components of each of these. So one of the most important things to consider before you actually start the meeting is should you actually have that meeting in the first place? And these are a bunch of questions that you can ask yourself to really come to that conclusion whether or not you should have that meeting. One of the ones I really want to focus on is the meeting one of our most valuable activities? I want to paint a picture of an example, say a training. When people say they want to come, they sign up, but they don't show up. And in this moment, those people who are not showing up are making the active decision to say something in my work life or personal life or other life or whatever is more valuable than me attending this meeting today. And so, one of the important things to think about too is you may think your meeting is valuable and schedule it, but if you can't convince the people around you that it is truly valuable, that you must meet, then they're not likely to follow you through to that meeting. But say you've convinced people that your meeting is truly valuable, you must meet, and they believe you and they're excited and raring to go. All you have right now is a vague notion of why your meeting is valuable. So you need some skill, some steps to really distill this vague notion into a defined specific purpose. So here's some things to consider. One of my favorite things to consider is drill, drill, drill. And the idea behind this is you could set up a meeting and call it, hey, we're meeting because we want to learn how to network. But there's different reasons to network. There's networking on LinkedIn, there's networking in person, there's networking etiquette. If you don't keep asking why and what to your meeting purpose, you won't get to those smaller, more distinct examples. And for example, networking etiquette is a different meeting entirely versus uh, knowing basics about networking or knowing how to network on LinkedIn. These are different meeting types that can help inform your purpose. One of the ways to use this is to think about what you want to accomplish in your meeting. And if what you want to accomplish is strictly information sharing or decision making, and knowing what it fits under in terms of activities can allow you to say, hey, so my meeting I want to plan is strictly informational and we're making decisions on X, Y, and Z. Let's use those activities to make a really effective purpose of, say, our purpose today is to deliver information about meetings so that you can make effective decisions about what you want to do for your future meetings or something like that. As you can see, once you know the activities you want to do, it can help you really define further your purpose for that evening. Here's some example categories to help you define sort of what goes on and the activities that are going to go on in your meeting as well. You can use this in very much the same way. If it's a progress check that defines your purpose in a different way than if it's a sense making or a community of practice or a workshop. So this is sort of how it helps how having an effective purpose helps inclusion, helps participation, helps people to feel more comfortable. One of the things I really want to focus on is I just want to harken back to the very beginning when I talked about the agenda. So when you have an agenda and a purpose, it is a document that people in your meeting can contribute to when you're doing that meeting effectively. So one of the most important things that you have to do now that you have a succinct defined purpose, is you have to connect that to who you need to invite. And one of the best ways to think about this is to think through the lens of who are your stakeholders in this meeting that you're conducting. Here are some questions on this slide that are really all about getting you to think about who is truly a stakeholder in your next meeting. And to summarize those questions, they're asking you to invite to your meeting people with expertise, people with organizational power, and people who you really need the buy-in for to really see your goals succeed. So I want to get a little bit more into expertise, organizational power, and buy-in because I think they deserve a little bit more description. What expertise is all about is that when you know who your experts are, you can actually plan in advance to bring them into the meeting. And what I mean by that is you go to them and you say, hey, this is my meeting purpose. I think you're an expert in this area. I'm going to call on you in this meeting. I ask you to think about X, Y, and Z. Or you can go to them in advance and really just prep them for what expertise they need to bring. Organizational power is a bit multifaceted and a bit more complex. On the first hand, organizational power allows people in the meeting to feel that what happens in the meeting will actually accomplish something, that it can actually be acted on. And the powerful person doesn't need to be there for that, but there needs to be this impression in your team, in your workplace, in your organization, where that powerful person is supporting the activities of the meeting and saying, this can actually get stuff done. If you have that, people will participate more because people will feel that they will be more impactful. The second thing organizational power does is it gives legitimacy to whatever meeting place it is. So if you have, for example, the boss or the president in a training, people will see that that training is supported top to down and considered valuable for the success of the organization as a whole and for the success of what the job is for that place of work. When people see that, they internalize that and they say, okay, it's not just my immediate supervisor, but it's a head leader, it's a head boss, and they're actively encouraging all of us to participate. And as a result, they'll consider it more valuable and they'll want to be there more and they'll want to share more of their ideas. And finally, this last bullet point is that sometimes judgment of power is complex and it can sort of be a negative for a meeting, and it's how you manage that matters. Finally, buy-in. The key part about this is that even if they're in the room or not in the room, a lot of these people sometimes are the least powerful people in the room, but they still need to be involved. If you're making a key organizational decision and you don't have stakeholders who are affected by it in some way involved in that key organizational decision and they don't like it, they're not motivated to help support it. But if you've secured the buy-in by having the stakeholders that you need actually attending your meeting, then you will be much more successful, but also you'll get much more participation afterwards, beforehand, and during that meeting as well. So just to get a little bit more into organizational power, what I'm saying here is not that power doesn't matter. There are some occasions where a powerful person has to be there because stuff has to get done and they have to insist on their way. And good meeting leaders are really aware of those occasions and aware of how they can be impacted by the meeting leader, but also aware of the fact that sometimes a powerful person needs to speak. What I'm talking about is situations where it's not urgent and a powerful person does not have to really go into the meeting purpose to get things done. It could be a free flowing debate. It's dependent on your purpose, basically. And so sometimes what happens in many organizations is a powerful person, even if the meeting's not meant to sort of require that power, that powerful person will still come in and they'll say, I want XYZ done. And they'll say it's a way that the whole meeting room comes and circles together in their heads and thinks, I gotta make them happy because this person's in charge of my job. And instead, that's not good, and you want that powerful person to almost not even be there in that situation. Because if the whole meeting space is worried about their jobs, they're not going to offer their ideas. They're just going to try to make what the powerful person wants happen. So here's some ideas of how to combat that on this slide. The key being that either the powerful person has to be abundantly honest about who they are, what they know, what they don't know, and what they're experts in, or two, the powerful person really has to take a back seat. And if they want their ideas shared, maybe they pick a proxy to do so. But in occasions where that powerful person doesn't have to exert that power, they shouldn't. And they should take a back seat and serve as a servant in the situation. So after you've picked the stakeholders, it's time to really think about who these people are and how are you going to get the maximum sort of benefit out of them. And that's one of the reasons why we do personality tests, department wide, company wide, group wide, team wide, because this helps you share who you are, how you function best, and how your team leader, your meeting attendee leader, your leader of the meeting can get the most out of you in that moment. So here are some of the personalities that are defined by some of these tests. And one of the things I really want you all to think about is A, who do you know in your workplace that really epitomizes one of these personalities? And B, what are some ideas that you have right now about how you can really sort of proactively both reach these people, but also proactively include structures in your meeting so that you've included all these different persons? Because sometimes we don't know who is going to be in the meeting and what they're like because we haven't worked with them much. And if we don't know, we can still pre-plan by including meetings that have a little bit of everything in them. So see, these are some of the ideas of how you might handle some of the different individuals that you'll face in meetings. I didn't want to go too in depth because you can actually do whole trainings on this subject, but I really wanted to sort of pick out some key points and focus on bullet 3 and bullet 5. Bullet 4 and bullet 5. What bullet 4 stands for is that gaps matter. If you have someone who is highly innovative and someone who is highly structured, if you just let that without any pre-planning go on, butting heads might happen. So you got to plan around that. You got to say, how do I deal with both these widely diverging personalities to include both of them in to make a really cohesive, effective meeting? The other thing is bullet 5. And bullet 5, what it's trying to say is, as long as you set the expectation that there's sort of safety, that every opinion matters, that you want to hear from everybody, that nobody's going to be sort of dismissed or discounted, and you've actually demonstrated that, you can actually use bullet 5's approach and either in the meeting or before the meeting or after the meeting, approach certain people that maybe have different personalities than yours and talk to them directly, honestly, and humbly, and sort of say, hey, how am I going to get the best of you in this meeting that we're running? And the final aspect of people is you have your stakeholders, you have how you know that you're going to get the best out of them. How many do you invite? So here's some ideas. The general principle is how much interaction is going to go on in this meeting. If there's a ton of interaction, if you expect people to contribute their ideas left, right, center, then you want the room to be about only 4 to 8. Because what happens is if you get more than 8 people in this space, there's going to be so much talking, and there's going to be certain people dominating, certain people sort of sharing 1 or 2 ideas, that you're going to get people who just don't want to talk because there's too many voices in the room. So all the literature on organizational behavior really suggests is that interaction heavy based meetings, 4 to 8. Now it depends on your purpose, obviously. If you're doing an informational meeting or a training meeting, you might consider like 30 or even a video, but 4 to 8 strictly for highly interactive meeting types. So now that we talked about who you're inviting, we need to take from that and talk about how does who you're inviting affect your agenda. And we also need to construct an agenda in order to meet those goals. So one of the ideas is to set limits. And let me give you an example. If one of your stakeholders that you're inviting is that powerful person that we talked about, maybe you say, for idea brainstorming and generation components, we're only going to spend 15 minutes. And in your agenda, you're constructing it so that 10 minutes is here, 5 minutes is there, 15 minutes is doing this. Focus on human nature, we'll talk about a little bit later too, but think about the personality discussion we just had. Human nature is to act according to their personalities. And so if you have someone, say, who's inexperienced, their human nature is to act towards that inexperience. You should pre-plan that and ask yourself, how are you going to help this person thrive? Underplan material, overplan your behavior. The key part about this is that oftentimes we overplan content, and so you want to actually underplan content so that you can get through everything effectively, because often the content takes more time than we think to present. Often people have questions, often people interrupt, often we have to deal with human behavior throughout this entire process. And so the general rule of thumb is, in your agenda, don't overplan, underplan. Have less to do and schedule more meetings or more communications in order to succeed doing that. And overplan how you do it so that you can always secure success of your purpose. And finally, the agenda should include measurements of success. You and your meeting attendees should be able to look back on the agenda and say, because these were the measurements of our success, we actually succeeded and did well. So I really want to take a moment and focus on human nature aspect of agendas. And here are some points that human beings are naturally prone to. And a lot of the fault in this is that when we set our agendas, we do 45 minutes of informational deliverance. We don't take the moment to even just simply say, stop, put everything down, stand up from your chair, walk to your co-worker's room, talk a little bit, and come back to this training. If we did that, we'd solve a lot of these human nature issues that often happen in how we plan our meetings and how we plan our agendas. And think about it this: you sit in a classroom for 45 minutes, non-stop, teacher talking, nothing else is going on. Or you sit in a training for 30 minutes, non-stop, training, talking, nothing else is going on. At the end of that 30 minutes, that last half, you're likely not to remember that as well. And it's because your attention wanes, and it's because human beings' attention wanes, and it's because we don't take a moment to say, stop this video, pause it, and go do something else for a while and come back to it. Doing that will help you process that and process what we've already talked about. So do that. I want to see you guys do that. So here's some of the points about how establishing this agenda will help. And one of the things I really want to focus on is this last bullet point, because I think the other two bullet points, you can sort of read them and understand how they sort of promote inclusion and maybe even fight against unconscious bias. But this last bullet point is a lot harder to understand because you really need to think about it as if you are the host of a party. If you're the host of the party and nobody has to do anything in advance to prepare for that party, then you don't need to encourage them to come. They're going to come if they have the time and if they enjoy what's going to happen. But when you ask more people, when you say bring X, bring Y, bring Z, bring your ideas, etc., then you actually need to put much more of your full weight and support behind the party to bring them from the point of invite to actually attending. And so you may have sort of organizational leaders sort of promote the meeting. You may send many more communications or emails because it's much harder for people to attend that meeting and have everything done. You may engage in one-on-one talks to really prepare for this meeting. In general, the more you ask of your meeting attendees, the more work you have to do, both in advance and during the meeting, to get them to want to be there and work. And so this final key about how to have a really effective meeting is ensure the best use of your resources. And what I want to do is really focus broadly first to give you some general ideas of what you need to think about. And so, like, the earlier the better. If you're planning a meeting and it's happening the next day and you sent out the meeting invite the day before because you decided the day before you want to have that meeting, you better be prepared to dominate that whole entire meeting because your attendees will not know how to participate. But if you've sent it a week in advance and you've set up the room, you've set up the technology, you've made sure your USB works, you've set the agenda out, you've set the goals of the meeting out, you've sent the material that people need to be aware of and bring, you're going to have a much better meeting and you're going to ensure that people can actually participate. That's one of the things for point 2, over communicate for anything. Email is notorious for getting lost. And so when you communicate a lot, especially about a really important meeting that you're leading, you're sending those signals to other people that, hey, this is important. This is not just a one-time thing. I'm not just emailing this meeting out for you to be aware of it. So here's some really practical steps about what to consider when you are preparing for a meeting and what you have to do. And this sort of varies depending on the purpose that you have. So if your purpose is very huge and important, you might want to do this even earlier than 72 hours in advance. So another part of handling your resources the best is actually making sure your room works and the way you want to have that meeting works. It can be horrific if you're having a phone meeting and your chosen sort of platform for facilitating this meeting just screws up. If this platform just screws up, then you'll end up with a situation where someone will email you and be like, I can't access what I'm supposed to access. And if you don't have a backup, then that meeting has just gone down the tubes and you have not actually succeeded in making sure your purpose works. So another thing I really want to focus on is that you can actually change your meeting up to really reflect your purpose better and reflect an action towards the purpose and culture you want to have in your organization. Here's some ideas, but I also think this movie does a really good job at sort of talking about it. So sit back and watch.
We've made a space where we can do projects with our companies that we can configure to be right for any activity. We can have the right space for whiteboarding, we can have the right space for drawing, we can have the right space for prototyping. All those things are possible with 5 minutes of rearranging or less. Hi, I'm Jake Knapp. I'm a design partner at Google Ventures, and this is our war room in San Francisco. We took a conference room, a regular kind of conference room like you see everywhere. We took out the table and we brought in as many whiteboards as we could. We brought in a bunch of flexible furniture. Everything's got wheels, or else it's lightweight enough that even I can move it by myself and I can barely do a push-up. When we're doing a design sprint with a company, we want to create a spatial memory for the team, and it's really hard to do that without a lot of space on the walls. When you're doing a long project and you're in a conference room and everybody's sitting at a table, the energy just plummets. It's hard to keep people engaged when the furniture isn't right for the activity. If you'd like to make your own war room, check out gv.com/library. We've got some resources there. You can find links to the furniture we've used and a how-to guide for making your own, regardless of what space you have and what your budget is.
So here's a question. Do you have whiteboards on every single wall? Do you have a space that makes your meeting exciting, fun, interactive, and worthwhile to go to? If you don't, then you may consider adjusting your space to make it fun, make it that special location. So in this slide, it's one of the benefits of actually adjusting your meeting space, because you can do something called the fishbowl method to actually increase participation. And you can see the rules on the slide, but the value of this is that sometimes communication can just sort of die down because people even run out of ideas. Or maybe you need everybody's opinion, but you don't need everybody talking about whatever your purpose is all the time. And so you have a small subset of people talking up front, but then you establish rules so that if someone has an opinion on the outside, they can actually come and join the conversation and in a meaningful way. And just to bring it all to a conclusion, this slide sort of indicates how all these ideas kind of help. And one of the things I really want to focus on is just this simplistic idea that if your PowerPoint doesn't work, if your USB doesn't work and you can't access the documents you need to, it's a distraction. And the meeting doesn't take place on time as easily, the meeting doesn't work as well, and people have a harder time readjusting when you get everything to work back to the main action. And so now that we've talked about what to do before, I want you to start either in your group or with the people around you actually using these ideas to make a meeting plan. And so first, in your groups, come up with an example of one meeting that you've had before, or that you led before, that you've been a meeting attendant before. And so write down that meeting's purpose and how you might use what you've learned today to make this purpose better. Or if the purpose is great already, why is this purpose great? Did you try to drill further down into this purpose and discovered you couldn't? Same with the agenda. How might you refine further how this agenda went? Was there even an agenda? Or did the meeting just happen and people started talking? And finally, space. Did the meeting leader use the space well? Did it fit the purposes of the meeting? If it did, why? If it didn't, how might you adjust to make this work? So now that we've talked about what you should do before a meeting, we gotta hit at what are the most important parts during a meeting. How and what do you need to think about when you do this? So here's some of the keys from the 12 keys. Own your role, manage your time well, include everyone, and establish an optimistic presence. So own your role. There's some basics on this. Dress more formally than your attendees. Because if you dress like a slob, your attendees might treat you like a slob. But if you're dressed professionally and even at or above where your attendees are, you earn that respect of someone who is seen as someone who cares. Also, you need to start at the very beginning of your meeting saying, this is what we're here for. This is what we need to accomplish. This is how long we're here for. Inviting communication for people to add to that. You also need to start and end that meeting on time, because remember what I said, when you engage in an agenda that's over planned and you're like at the end of the meeting, you're like, stay for 1 more minute, people stop listening. When you develop habits to start and end the meeting on time, you ensure that people don't stop listening because they have something better to do. Also, planning for your actions as a presenter. When you're owning your role, if you know you need to go to this person or this person to do a specific action, you have that in your agenda. You have that in your personal presenter notes and plan, how you might do so that you're not just making something up on the fly. So how to manage meeting timing is one of the other keys. And a couple points I really want to illustrate here. You actually get more inclusion when you are there on time to set up and are able to welcome guests. If you're sitting in the corner, or if you're busy sort of setting things up and you don't have enough time, people are not going to feel like you care and you care about their contribution. And if they feel that way, they're not going to contribute. You should also allot and plan in your agenda how much time you want to spend on each. That's one of the biggest reasons meetings go overtime, is that time frames for different sections are not planned out in advance. And nobody's taking ownership of that. So if you want 10 minutes for discussing brainstorming on a particular problem, then put that in your agenda and vocalize it to the group saying, hey, we have 10 minutes to do this. Anyone want to take ownership of the 10 minutes so that we can do this effectively? So I really wanted to include this video as part of this training because I think the meeting leader in this video does a really solid job of owning his role and managing time well. And so I wanted to include that example for everybody to watch. But I also like this video a lot because it shows the power of individual participants intervening and helping the team thrive. And even though this meeting training is not really about the power of participants, I thought it important to at least highlight it a little bit so that you all can see what participants can actually do in meetings. And so the best way to access this is to pause the video, go to the YouTube link right there, and watch it directly off like an Internet Explorer or a Google Chrome or some web browser. Enjoy. So I've talked a lot about how you manage time in a meeting, and one of the things that I really want to talk about too is, how do you act if you actually make the mistake and overplan, or you make the mistake and you just go too long, or you haven't set time limits in advance? One of the things I really want to sort of showcase is that there's a set step process for doing that effectively. You don't just keep going. You actually acknowledge openly that you've gone over, you discuss what you want to get done, and you give people an option to choose. So why does any of this matter? When you're aware of time, you're aware of the time you're asking of people, and you are respecting that time. People's time is valuable. They could spend their time doing work for your organization, but they're spending it at your meeting. Show that respect. And if you show that respect, your people attending the meeting will want to participate. And finally, Knowing who you're supposed to be will allow you to pre-plan how you want to act on your agenda, but also will allow you to know what you should be aware of in how you act in order to get people to participate. If you just let a meeting happen, it's going to happen and you're going to get whatever the results are. But if you actually pre plan what you want to happen and own your role accordingly, you're going to get what you want to happen and your purpose and goals. So, a point should be made about how do you open a meeting, especially since we're talking about what to do during a meeting and we started this training, this meeting with a icebreaker. You should always encourage people to talk because it has a number of benefits. It allows meeting attendees to know where each other is in their headspace, to know how to involve everyone, but it also brings people together, brings cohesion together. Even if you're a team that's known each other for 10 years, you can always be more cohesive because you can always see each other more as equals instead of your position or job title, etc. Here's some other defined ways that you can include people, and much of the slide is self-explanatory, but the one thing I really want to sort of stress are these last two slides. When you call on people individually, you gotta make sure that you're not sort of saying they should have an opinion or something to offer. If they're quiet, maybe they agree with everything. But still, they have skin in the game. They are there at that meeting. You are sacrificing their time for your meeting. And so you got to make sure that they are at least bought in, that they at least sort of agree or at least can form an opinion about something in the meeting that's really important to them. The last one is this idea that having like a talking stick actually is beneficial. It's not often done in bigger organizations, but really when everybody knows the meaning of the symbol that you're using and why you're using it, then when you throw the ball around, when you pass the talking stick around, people are going to buy into that. And you're actually going to have a tool now that you can use to increase the participation you do. Here's some other ideas. And so, why does this matter? This these bullet points are sort of why, when you do these ideas to increase participation, you're actually empowering your organization and leading to more inclusivity. So I want you to pause this video and just sort of read through each bullet point a little bit. So one of the things I really want to illustrate in this slide is that all the things it talks about will help participation by making people more wanting to share. But this slide doesn't mean don't be negative. There are times in a meeting space where you really will have to say, this is horrible. We need to fix this. And you have the right to say that. What I'm trying to protect against is that sometimes if you say that too much, people don't want to participate because they've learned that they're helpless over their own fate. So this next section of slides specifically talks about ways to handle during a meeting difficult people or difficult meeting personalities. So I wanted this slide in here because I wanted something that showcases how to insert norms and rules into a very professional meeting space so that it's not something where your meeting attendees might look at it and be like, oh, I know how to listen. I don't need to worry about that. But it's actual sort of productive and good reflection for the team to do to really find out how they work well together and what they can improve to even improve the teamwork going on. I apologize in advance for the poor videography of this video, but I still think his content is worth the watch, so I want to encourage you guys to do that. So please pause the video and navigate to this YouTube link by either typing it in or figuring out a way to get it in your URL area of the web, and enjoy. So why are these rules that he talked about useful? Well, so the main point I really want to focus on is the second bullet point, useful for dealing with gender bias. One of the ideas behind the unconscious biases we've had is that men have more to contribute, which is false. But if you don't set ground rules for example, how you have a discussion or how you include everybody in the discussion, or how you get people's input just in general, or what nonverbal behavior is appropriate and not, you can get a situation where that man, because he's a dominator, dominates. And everybody just goes with it because they've succumbed to the stereotype of, or they have that bias somewhere in them. And so when you have these rules on these topics, you can, as a meeting member or even the meeting leader, say, hey, stop it. We've all agreed that this is one of the things we care about. Let's focus in and do this right. So follow this link if you can. It's a lynda.com LinkedIn learning link. I want you guys to follow this link because I can't do this on this video, but I think that the guy on this really does a good job taking not just rules, but like how and what words would you say to individuals who are being difficult in your meeting. And so I think it's a really important thing for you guys to understand and deal with throughout the meeting learning. So here's some general difficult people tips. One of the things I really like is this idea of using a facilitator and designating someone in your meeting to be the facilitator of shared norms, decisions, limits, and that stuff. So that if you do have someone who maybe is a dominator and is dominating your meeting, that facilitator can say, okay, we've agreed to talk to about 10 minutes for this. Can we stop, and I want to hear from someone else as well. Or that facilitator can say, okay, let's stop in the middle of this meeting and talk about how we're doing as a group. How are we functioning? Do we need improvement? To me, the facilitator is probably one of the best ways to deal with difficult people in meetings. And so I strongly recommend it as a meeting tool in order to even encourage more inclusion and participation. When you have a facilitator, I can almost guarantee that if they're doing their job right, you have more participation in your meeting. Finally, depersonalization, just to define it, the idea behind it is that you want to take any difficult conversations in that meeting and make it more about the what and less about the who. So you also may want to use this tactic to really get people to think more broadly about the ideas presented. So if you say, Allison's ideas clearly have some strengths according to you, but James's ideas may well be more important, you're actually getting people to say, hey, that Allison idea that I may have dismissed earlier has something to it. It's not blank. It's not something I need to avoid. Active listening is also a key component of doing really good, crucial conversations in meetings. And here's an example of how to really pull that off. Please feel free to pause the video and look at it. There are consequences to managing these things poorly. When you have negative people, emotions drain. It's just much harder to be in a stressful environment than a happy environment. When you have negative people, people don't want to share. People don't want to participate. If their emotions are draining, if they're much more negative and people don't want to participate because they're dealing with that negative person, then you'll have less inclusion. You'll have less inclusion of different ideas, different meeting perspectives, etc. So now that we've talked a little bit about what to do during the meeting, we need to conclude sort of with how do you finish meetings off? How do you do that well? So two things to focus on is illustrate the positive and action items. For illustrate the positive, people like to feel like the meeting that they went to, the time that they sacrificed mattered. If they don't, they come back to the next meeting and they think, ah, screw it. This won't matter as much. And so when you take the time at the end to illustrate that this meeting mattered, we got a lot done. It actually makes people pay attention to that fact and pay attention to the fact that the meeting was useful and want to contribute to future meetings. So here's a definition of really what an action item is and what deserves to be written down as such versus something else. These bullet points are somewhat self-explanatory, but what it does for the meeting is that it really keeps people focused on what's important, what they need to talk about, what they need from everybody else in the room. Finally, 1 hour later, this is not often done ever in the meeting space, and it's because there's that phenomenon in organizations where it's one meeting after another, after another, after another, after another, after another. And when you have that situation, you don't have time to reflect on how the past meeting goes. So what I would recommend is take these questions after every meeting you do, and before you go to your next meeting, maybe you close the door of your meeting space and take 5 minutes and just write down some thoughts. Maybe you have the voice recorder app and you don't mind hearing your own voice and you record it as you're walking to the next meeting. Spend some time on this because when you refer to those notes, you might be able to sort of say, oh, this person was interrupted. I need to give that interrupted person more power in the next meeting and purposely plan for that. Or, oh, this person didn't talk. I need to seek them out in the next meeting. Giving yourself the ability to reflect on how you need to change the next meeting, even if it's just 5 minutes after your previous meeting, can make a world of difference in inclusion and get people to participate much more. And finally, one more day later, to see Shirley Temple here and to sing her song, is that the meeting doesn't end the day you have the meeting. You can get people's opinion. You can get people to add to the meeting notes so that they're complete, to add to the action steps, to comment on the action steps, to even comment on the meeting notes. But you also need to assign someone so that when a person agrees to do something in this meeting, that they actually act on it. So one of the things I want to focus on now is we want to watch some videos in this last half about meetings performed poorly. And I want you to use what you've learned to sort of identify these bullet points and even talk about with the person next to you how this done well or this done poorly. It's really affecting participation and inclusion in this meeting space. So I'll do one now and one a little later. So this is the first video that I have for this video analysis assignment or activity. And what I'm going to encourage you guys to do is watch this by, preferably the best way is to stop the video and navigate to this YouTube link to watch it, and either on a piece of paper or just somewhere where you can take notes. Write down what I said in the previous slide, which was identify any problems in the meeting and what you have learned that can sort of resolve some of these problems, but also identify anything that they did well. So please pause the video and navigate to this YouTube video and watch it and do the analysis. So just to review what just happened, ask yourself, did that guy own his role as the leader? Ask yourself maybe, how would you pre-think the various personalities in the room? Ask yourself some of the other questions that we've already asked. What are the answers? Pause and talk. So now in this last section, what we're really going to hit hard is specific meetings and some of the specific ideas and concepts you need to know in order to run these meetings effectively and to include everybody. So online or phone meetings are some of the most important and constant meetings that happen in the workplace. And so this first bullet point, I think, is one of the most critical parts of this. When you have an online phone meeting, you have people not in a room. And when you have people not in a room, you have that bias of out of sight, out of mind. One of the few ways you can actually combat that in this setting is to have someone whose job it is to watch how the group is functioning and to be a champion for that person who's not there. Maybe that person talks about like how people are talking to each other to that person. Maybe that person constantly asks questions to that person who's not there to get them involved. Phone meetings absolutely have to have a facilitator in order to be effective and include everyone. Some of these other ideas are really impactful as well. I really do want to focus on that first one though. And here's a lot of the things that the facilitator can do. I already shared that they can, you know, ask questions and summarize the discussion, but that they can also sort of poll the entire group, even those who are not there, or even act as a phone buddy and make sure that that person knows everything that's going on who's not there. For online phone meetings, here's some other sort of main concepts. You want to schedule meetings where people can do it. So if everybody's abroad, it's harder to find a meeting time, and so don't move those abroad meetings to different times very frequently. But also put everybody on remote. So if one person's out, have everybody be on their computers out. This ensures that you don't have to necessarily have a facilitator for that specific person who's not there because everybody can see everyone on their computer screen. So this is video analysis number 2. I want you to sort of apply the same questions that you applied in video analysis number 1, but this is really directed towards phone or online meetings as well. So incorporate sort of all you learned from the beginning, but also incorporate what we just talked about with phone and online meetings. Best way to access this video is to pause the video, navigate to that YouTube link on the bottom left, and then watch it directly from the Internet Explorer. So just think about how you might have improved that mess, that hot mess that was that. Next meeting we're going to talk about is one-on-one. And so some of the main bullet points I want you all to focus on is you always want to try to celebrate success and putting your teacher hat on these meetings because sometimes you can look at one-on-ones as pointless. And I would argue that they're not. These are meetings you should have every week. And if you have nothing to say about the work and you checked in and everybody's happy, then put your teacher hat on and use that meeting to grow your staff. So these are defined meeting structures to try in your next meeting. And what their purpose is that these structures, these ideas, are sort of tailored around a specific purpose or goal. So like hackathons are for creative innovation and problem solving. Q-storms are strictly a problem-solving / brainstorming technique. And action learning is all about problem solving. And there are defined ways to do these actions so that you can actually achieve the outcome that you're looking for in your purpose. I have some supplemental materials on this, so please feel free to see them. And please feel free to learn from them and try to apply them in your workplace. So here's some ideas of how to have a brainstorming meeting in order of what to think about. So you define the problem, you lay the context and definitions out, but then you have the appropriate facilitator, you invite the right people, and then you sort of really do what we taught earlier. And one of the things I really want to focus on is that the role of the facilitator is important here. You need a facilitator to make sure that everybody's ideas does not become a jumbled mess, but actually blossoms and grows into a fruitful end. That facilitator needs to make sure that people are meeting goals, setting tasks, getting stuff done. The meeting is getting something done. Because too often brainstorming can just be let's throw out as many ideas as we have. Here's some descriptions of what everything that I just put on the last slide is defined by. Here's some steps for problem solving meetings. And so you really want to go through this diagram from 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And you want to consider the frame of reference. So oftentimes, an unusual aspect that we don't think about is you're having these meetings at work. In work, you get defined thought. You get a defined culture and a defined field that shapes thought. That shapes and limits the amount of participation and ideas that are out there. But if you do like a let's get together over drinks and hash it out with maybe someone taking notes, that takes the organizational context out of your thinking and it empowers you to be a little bit more creative and to offer a little bit more ideas for how you might solve the problem. Informational meetings. So the best way to think about this is as a teacher might. Here's some basic concepts about what you might do. Here's some description of those basic concepts about like when you're using effective presentation strategies, you don't want to be all over the place, but it actually matters for you to say first idea, second idea, third idea, fourth idea. You actually want to be heard. You want to use a microphone if you're dead in the water. Here's some things that people don't think about though. So human nature demands that we don't pay attention very well to long periods of information. So get people out of their seats every 15 minutes to get them out of that lecture format and talk to each other. Because of that human nature, keep summarizing what you've talked about and where you're going. Because of that information block, underplan what you want to say. An interesting thing that you can use if you want to incorporate technology is Twitter. So have people tweet you while you're doing information. Maybe they have a question that comes up that you can answer in that moment when someone has tweeted you. Or even not. I've seen meetings where a person takes all the tweets that they've been given at the end of it and goes through and answers the questions that they want to answer. It can be a really important, engaging tool. And here's sort of some more ideas. Specifically, I want to focus on the underplan, is that we often underestimate how long it will take us to get through a series of information. And so when people overplan, they'll rush through it by doing what I call speedy talk. And they'll go, blah, blah, blah. Speedy talk is so fast because you have to have so much information to get it through and not actually be clear in what they're speaking. So here's a summary of what we really all talked about throughout the entirety of the presentation. Just some really key points to keep in mind. That you want to care about your feelings of the people in your room. You overlook reflection a lot of times when you're conducting a meeting. You don't plan enough when conducting a meeting. You need to have a purpose to construct how the rest of the meeting should go. And this sort of encompasses everything that we've already talked about, just to bring it back home. And so here's an activity I want you guys to engage in to sort of finish this meeting training up. Come up with one meeting that is planned for the future that you know about. It could be in a group where you have a group meeting leader sort of involved in it. Think about sort of what I'm saying in these slides. So imagine you're in charge of the meeting, but also think about these questions. What I'm trying to do is to incorporate everything we just said into a meeting plan where you're actually planning out your next meeting so that you have something to use for the next meeting that you're conducting. So please sort of work through these questions on a piece of paper. For example, a black hat is someone who's playing devil's advocate throughout the entirety of the meeting. Also work through these sets of questions. Also work through these sets of questions. And in this slide, I really want you to bring this back to the core structure of our presentation. What should happen before, during, and after. And then finally, as we conclude, get into your groups or get into the people around you and come up with questions you still have and see if you can help each other answer it. When you're done, please voice those questions on the YouTube comment sheet or just in person if you're doing this in person. Thank you. Thank you for your time today. I hope this has been fun.